Now, the second major point of evolution is the universal common ancestor. And it's basically phrased like this. Since parents and offspring are similar but not identical, are there limits to change? In other words, can you take all the little variety of these cute little puppy dogs right up there on the screen, and given enough time, will you be able to get one that can do something like that? Well, the Bible gives us a pretty good answer to that. Right in Genesis chapter 1, organisms reproduce after their kind. Genesis 1, 11, and 12. I bet you didn't realize there were so many biological statements right in Genesis 1 where he is giving these tremendous answers. Lots of variety, different species, but organisms always reproducing after their kind. That's a great question. And the take-home message from Genesis 1 is this: life is fundamentally discontinuous. There isn't that universal common ancestor. There are common ancestors like Adam and Eve for all of us, but not a universal common ancestor. And that's the biblical message. Of course, evolution says this, that the diversity of life on earth is the result of evolution. And they point to this glorious tree of life right here, in which life begins about 3.5 billion years ago and evolves over long periods of time until you get to the diversity of life on earth. Now, you couldn't have two more contrary explanations. Life is fundamentally continuous, and life is fundamentally discontinuous. That's pretty much the way it is. Well, let's see what science says in regard to the universal common ancestor plus unlimited change. This: if you go to the laboratory and you look at the percentage of experiments that's showing that organisms have changed into a fundamentally different kind, that's what you get, 0%. And the number of experiments which show that an organism has never changed into a fundamentally different kind, 100% in all observational science. Even experiments that have tried deliberately to change organisms have failed. 100% fundamentally same kind. And in 2009, on Darwin's birthday, this scientific paper was published, a 50,000 generation salute to Charles Darwin on the longest running experiment on evolution in the world. For over 35 years, Richard Lenski has been taking E. coli bacteria, taking 90% out, destroying them, growing the next 10% for a day, day after day after day. And after 50,000 generations, they had this salute to Charles Darwin. As I read the paper, I wondered what the salute was for. Because after 50,000 generations, these E. coli bacteria were what? Still E. coli bacteria. Hadn't changed. And you know who wants this experiment to continue to go until the Lord returns? I do. I do. Because I'm going to make one of two predictions. One, these bacteria are going to go extinct through mutational meltdown. Or two, when you get to the 5 millionth generation, there's still going to be E. coli bacteria, confirming over and over again that organisms reproduce after their kind and always have reproduced. Even when you look in the fossil record, it shows that creatures have always reproduced after their kind. You look at this shrimp, allegedly 360 million years ago, essentially identical to a creature living today. You know, I could really turn the knife on this because I could actually throw up dozens and dozens of photographs of creatures of their fossils and the living counterpart, and they look virtually identical, confirming this biblical truth that organisms reproduce after their kind. So this is what we really find. We find a huge diversity of organisms on this planet, and all of these connecting lines are just nothing but imaginative speculation. And there are lots of lines of evidence which are going to contradict this, which led new scientists to publish in 2009 this article, "Darwin Was Wrong, Cutting Down the Tree of Life." And I'm going to hit it with even some more evidence as we go on through this constructive. So on this point, the Bible was absolutely right again. Life always reproduces after its kind. No observable exceptions to this whatsoever. Well, what about What about all of these other books on evolution? What about the other evidences for evolution which we might encounter, such as the dramatic changes that are possible, like those differences in finch beaks or the different coat color on mice living in different environments, or even antibiotic resistance? Well, this takes us to the third reason why evolution is not scientifically valid. There are always, and listen for them carefully, always appeals to extrapolations far, far, far beyond what the evidence will bear. Changes in coat colors, is it going to explain the diversity of life on Earth? From fleas and bees and trees and me's and all of those other kinds of things? That's a far extrapolation. So all of the evidence for evolution falls into these categories right there. Francis Ayala, who used to be the president of the Academy of Sciences, wrote this book, Darwin's Gift to Science and Religion. He summarizes a lot of these evidences on one page. And he says this: the embryos of humans and other non-aquatic vertebrates exhibit gill slits. Human embryos also exhibit by the 4th week a well-defined tail, persisting only as a rudiment in the adult coccyx. Embryonic rudiments are inconsistent with claims of intelligent design. A familiar rudimentary organ is the appendix. The human appendix is a functionless vestige that argues against creation by intelligent design. And you see it presented in textbooks to your kids just like this. Well, very quickly, let me push back on some of those. You look at that drawing of that little embryo there, and you see those little folds and grooves around its neck that they call gill slits. Never have been gill slits, never are gill slits, never have gill material in them. Sometimes children are even born with rudiments of those and have never had gill slits. In fact, they're going to develop into some important organs in your neck and your lower jaw. And what about that tail that you see up there? That tail. Well, let me explain that. As baby is developing in mom's womb, the backbone is put down first. And then baby grows into that backbone. So that very tip that you see there, baby's going to grow into that, and that is not a vestigial organ, that coccyx. In fact, as my good friend Frank Shern would say, if Dr. Ayala believes that's a vestigial organ, ICR will pay to have that surgically removed for him, but we won't pay for his diapers that he'll need for the rest of his life as he loses total bowel control. Not a vestigial organ, and all of you here are thankful that you have it and it's working right now. So that is important. Someone sitting next to someone who's glad. Okay, all right. And what about that appendix right there? Supposedly a vestigial, useless organ? Well, just in 2013, pretty useful. Appendix evolved more than 30 times. And this is what this paper says. The researchers compiled information on the diets of 361 mammals, including 50 species now considered to have an appendix. Catch this. And they plotted the data on a mammalian evolutionary tree. They found that the 50 species are scattered so widely across the tree, meaning they don't fit the evolutionary story, that the structure must have evolved independently at least 32 times. Wow. Doesn't fit the tree, so we force it into a what? Counterintuitive and mystifying explanation right off the bat. Well, so much for those evidences.